So we're very happy to be back with our family, the Catholic Worker. I think the last time we hosted an event might have been back in October. But here we are again to talk about, first off, Pope Leo XIII's encyclical letter, Rerum Novarum. How many people have actually heard of it? Let's start with the people who have heard of it. Okay. Anyone actually read it? Oh, okay. So maybe after tonight, you will. Who's heard of the Mondragon workers' co-op movement started in Spain? Okay, cool. So for those of you who are new to both, you're in for an exciting ride. For those who are familiar, what I hope to do tonight is to kind of piece together the relationship between Rerum Novarum, Pope Leo XIII's legacy, and how the Mondragon movement put it into action, how they applied it, and why I think it's important for us to look at both of these examples given the situation we're in today. So just to start with today, I want to share a memory from a couple months ago. So this is, I'm thinking right after the 2024 presidential election. I was sitting at dinner with a group of friends, all of whom happened to share the same faith, all of whom were Catholic, but who voted in very different ways in that election. Some voted for the two mainstream candidates, some voted third party, some abstained from voting. And it was a kind of perplexing conversation in some ways because we all had the same fundamental beliefs. We all shared the same faith, pretty much the same moral values. But when it came down to voting, in the voting booth, we ended up with different conclusions. And I tried to figure out, okay, how is it that people of goodwill, forget that we're Catholic, that we're Christians, that how is it that people of goodwill could come to such different conclusions when it comes down to politics? And the more I engaged my friends in this conversation, I realized that they weren't really picking the candidate that they thought was going to serve the common good, who was going to really help this country the most. They were just choosing between the lesser of several evils. Or the friends who abstained from voting said, well, it's all evil, so I don't want to participate at all. But the more we talked about this fact that we're dissatisfied with all the options, we tried to pick who is the least harmful one, who is not as bad as the others. We were all dissatisfied that this was the criterion that we had to use, that we had to pick the least horrible person. And on top of being frustrated with that criterion, we also felt like, honestly, it felt like voting was a waste of time. Because what are we actually doing? What are we actually accomplishing? We all had this desire to contribute to the common good in a concrete way. We wanted to see the results. We wanted to do something with our own hands. It just felt like there are so few avenues to do that. There are fewer spaces where an everyday person can do that. Of course, you can come here and do so. But again, fewer people are looking for these concrete places to contribute to the common good. And not long after that, a friend of mine asked me to help him put together an exhibit about the story of the Mondragon workers' co-op. And I was interested in knowing more about the story, especially given the circumstances we were in, because what this movement built was something that concretely changed the lives of so many people, starting in Spain, but eventually spreading throughout the whole world. And the more I looked at the history of Mondragon, the more I looked at how Rerum Novarum and Pope Leo inspired it, I realized how important it is for us today, especially living in the US, to know these stories, because at least for me personally, it's helped me think through a lot of the insanity that we're facing today. So let's do this. I want to start, before we get into Mondragon itself, I want to talk about Rerum Novarum and the circumstances that inspired Pope Leo XIII to write it. So, okay, needless to say, in late 1800s, we're in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, which is radically changing every aspect of life. It's changing the way products are made. It's changing workers' relationships with their bosses. It's changing the way we travel. It's changing our own relationship with reality and the people we live around. And you see that it's spurred by a certain kind of ideology, a certain kind of economic model, this idea that the market should be totally free, totally unfettered, that people should be able to come up with all kinds of innovations without any restrictions. And needless to say, this breeds a certain type of individualism. It breeds this kind of tunnel vision where you only focus on efficiency, on trying to maximize profits, and you forget, why do we produce anything in the first place? Why do we create businesses in the first place? If not to serve other people, if not to build up the common good. And of course, then we have people recognizing, okay, this is becoming excessive, this is becoming too much. It's breeding all kinds of injustices, especially on the workers, especially on the poor. So we have to do something about this. This is where Marx comes in. Seeing the excesses of the free market, he wants to overturn this entire system. He wants to create a new system where the workers are valued, where the workers actually have a say, where they have power. Most of us are familiar with this story. Pope Leo sees all the turmoil. He sees the injustices that people are suffering from, and he also sees the violence that is coming from people following Marx's ideas, at least in a more extreme way. And he says, none of these options really fit what Christ was proposing, what Christ came to bring to humanity, to bring to society. So to baptize one of these options, to kind of take one, adopt it, and then just sprinkle certain Christian principles on top was an inadequate starting point. Rather, he said, we need to take a step back. Rather than jumping into the zeitgeist, jumping into all the confusion, all the violence, we need to step back and ask, what's going on here? How did these changes come into play? What is the impact that they're having on people's real lives, on society? And how can we come to an original judgment, an original position as people who have met Christ, as people who have met this person who claims to bring the real fulfillment of the human person, the real flourishing of society. And from this kind of original judgment, how do we propose a new kind of society, a new model that does take into account the entirety of the person's needs, that does really value the common good, again, instead of just picking the least of all the evils and then sprinkling Catholic principles on top. So the fruit of this effort that Pope Leo XIII did was the encyclical letter, Rerum, Novarum, which he published in 1891. And I want to go through some of the essential principles that he's putting forth in this document, and again, keeping in mind the context that he wants to offer a more adequate, more complete response to all the turmoil in society at that point in time. So he starts with this premise that, okay, if God becomes a human being, if Jesus enters into the human realm as the Son of God, and that means all human beings have this infinite dignity, no matter where they're from, no matter how much money they make. It's a total inalienable dignity. And if we don't start from this, then we're never going to be able to create a just society. And part of that understanding of human dignity recognizes that the human person has a totality of needs. It's not just material, it's not just bread and water. Man doesn't live on bread alone. We have a need for beauty, we have a need for community, for justice, for truth. And if we don't take into account this totality of needs, again, we're not going to be able to create a society that values the human person for who he or she is. And then as we, starting from this building block, entering into the social, entering into the political, everything must be ordered to the common good. Everything must be ordered towards the flourishing of all human beings, sharing life together. And essential to this is the preferential option of the poor, because again, if Jesus began his ministry reaching out to those who are most marginalized, those who are forgotten, we have to take into account their needs in particular when organizing society, but also we have to take into account the dignity of the worker. And this is coming from the understanding that, again, if God came down into the human realm, lived a regular life like the rest of us, ate, slept, danced, cried, worked, we have to recognize that the worker participates in God's work of creation. We are co-creators with God when we work. So this is why there's this special attention paid to the poor and to the worker. And from there, we have the principle of solidarity. So ultimately, we should aspire not just to flourish individually, but together as a community, to share our goods in common. But also, when we're facing a conflict, when we're facing some kind of issue, we should do all that we can to resolve it. We should do all that we can to reconcile, rather than to eliminate the opposition, rather than to eliminate the enemy. And this is how Pope Leo is directly responding to the excesses of both the free market, which is completely individualistic, which places the self-interested individual in the center, and the excesses of Marx's collectivist ideal, which will permit for violence in the name of justice, which, again, Leo's going to say no. The ideal needs to be reconciliation rather than, class antagonism. There has to be at least an effort to reconcile first. And then ultimately, the principle of solidarity recognizes that I'm not really myself, I'm not really free if I'm living in isolation. It's when I live in relationship with others, when I live in community, and this is the foundation of this community here, that I really flourish, that my needs are fully accounted for. So the counterpart to solidarity is the principle of subsidiarity. So this idea that a larger entity should not swoop in and do for a smaller entity what they can do for themselves. And that when we're solving problems, we should always start from the bottom up, start from the most immediate, most personal level as we can, and then we can work our way up from there. And there are several reasons why the church and Pope Leo have emphasized this principle. First of all, again, it's this recognition that needs are best understood on the most basic level, but it's also that power is less prone to corruption the smaller it is. The larger and larger it gets, the more corrupt it has the potential to be, the more damage it can wreak. So just some basic examples that I find to be useful when talking about subsidiarity. So if there's a traffic light that stops working on 2nd Avenue, I'm not going to send a letter to the White House to fix it, because obviously they're not even going to do it, given I don't have to tell you why. But it's a local issue. I'm not going to write to the national, federal government to solve it. I need to write to the city's representatives, because they understand how these streets work better than someone who's very far removed. Or we could take the example of a helicopter parent. So we all know those parents who never want to let their kids solve their problems for themselves because they're their special little snowflake. If the kid gets a bad grade, mommy calls the teacher and says, why did you give my son or daughter this bad grade? Obviously, we know what the consequence is going to be. This kid is never going to learn how to fend for themselves. They're never going to learn how to take up their own responsibility. So as much as the parent may have good intentions, the principle of subsidiarity says if the child can resolve it themselves, it's better for them to do that, because they learn responsibility. They learn that they have the agency to act for themselves. And it builds up their sense of dignity. And the last example that I always come back to when talking about subsidiarity is from the Long Loneliness, is from Dorothy herself, when she says that, the appeal of getting a welfare check from the state, because if I'm in need and I ask a friend or if I ask a relative for help, it's a very humbling experience. It might make me feel ashamed of myself because the person knows me. I'm afraid that they're going to judge me. And then I'm going to be indebted to them if they support me. Whereas with the state, it's less personal. I'm not going to feel as judged. I'm not going to feel like I owe them back. But this is precisely the issue that Dorothy was pointing out. Why are we so afraid of our need to depend? Why are we so afraid of looking in the mirror and recognizing, we can't always take care of ourselves. We need to ask for help. And not only that we deprive our neighbor of the opportunity to love us, to support us in our need. Again, it's easier if we let the state handle it. But the problem is that the state can't love you. The state doesn't have a relationship with you. This isn't to demonize welfare. And the last time we were here with Martha, she had some interesting things to say at this point. But the point is, if a problem can be resolved on a more basic level, better to do it there, because again, my needs are understood and it's less prone to being corrected. The last point I want to draw out for Rerum Novarum before we move on to Mondragon, which is one of the more radical parts of the encyclical, is Pope Leo's defense of labor unions. So stemming from this recognition of the dignity of the worker who co-creates with God, is this understanding that the reality behind the industrial production system and ultimately free market capitalism is that those in power, capital, tends to become corrupted, tends to take advantage of the workers. Why? Because there are no restrictions, there are no limits on the power of capital, which again, Marx is trying to resolve. He's trying to kind of overturn this entire system, trying to eliminate capital, which Leo is saying, okay, this isn't an adequate solution. This isn't going to work. And again, there are moral ramifications for this. So how can we address this problem rather than sentimentalizing it, rather than just wishing it will go away? We have to create structures that afford the workers more agency so that they can protect their dignity without trying to eliminate capital, without trying to have without having this antagonistic relationship. So he says unions are probably the most realistic avenue to defend the workers' agency and ultimately their sense of dignity. It's from what he says about the dignity of the worker and the importance of unions, of labor trying to collaborate with capital, that we come to the Mondragon a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit, before we get to the movement, about its founder. So Father Jose Maria Arizmendi Arieta Madariaga from Basque Country, Spain. We're just going to call him Father Arizmendi, which is what they call him for short. Though I hear some of the Zoomers, Gen Z, like to call him Father Riz because he was Rizda. You know what that means? He was kind of cool looking. I'll show you the pictures. So Father Arizmendi, we'll call him that. So born in the Basque Country in Spain. If you know Spain, you know that there are there are four main languages. So Basque, Castilian, what else? Catalan, and
Galicia.
Gallego. There. So Basque Country, if I'm not mistaken, Basque is the least like the other languages in Spain. It's not a Romance language, or is it? Right. So
It's actually its own European subset.
I'll look at you.
Comparison.
He was my student, by the way. That's why he's so smart. No, so it's its own language family. It's not the same as Spanish at all. But this is important. It's important to understand that, each of the regions in Spain do have their distinct identities. And obviously today it's very complicated. But this notion of Basque identity is going to come into play during the foundation of Mondragon. We'll get to that. Anyway, so Father Arizmendi is born in Basque Country, Spain, 1915, to a family of farm workers, and also a very devout Catholic family. And it was through working on the farm that he really was instilled with this notion of work, especially working with your hands, being such a dignified thing, as something that brings you closer to God. This space where you discover that you as a human being are called to create alongside God. And again, like working on a farm, needless to say, a Catholic worker understands this. You really see that you're generating something divine through this kind of work. You're really participating with God in that work. And then when he was 12 years old, he discerned a call to enter the minor seminary at a very young age. So he goes through seminary formation, but once we hit 1931, we end up at the start of the Spanish Civil War. So if you know a little bit of Spanish history, you have the Republicans who deposed the monarchy, the Republicans, not the MAGA Republicans, whole different thing. Republicans is referring to socialists, who mostly people are secularists, some of them are communists. But the point is, again, they deposed the monarchy, established the Second Spanish Republic, and this is difficult for him because they do impose some restrictions on the church. I mean, it is anti-clericalist and secularist, ultimately. Then the Civil War itself begins after the nationalists, led by Francisco Franco, stage a coup in 1936. It fails, but they keep going until they defeat the Republicans in 1939, and this is when Franco's regime officially begins. This was very painful for him while still being in the seminary because he saw his own brothers in the seminary extremely divided politically, and this comes back to the story I told in the beginning. And he wondered, how is it that not only do we share the same faith, we're called to this vocation of the priesthood, and we end up in so many different directions politically. I mean, some were behind the Republicans, some wanted to preserve the monarchy, some were behind Franco. And he comes to this point where he says, none of these options really correspond with not only my beliefs, but like what I know will really make for a good society, a society that serves the common good. while of course he understood, like on one hand, if you look at the Republicans, like there was, because it was driven mostly by leftists, there was this concern for the dignity of the workers. He said, okay, this is a valid thing, but their secularism was untenable. Their collectivist ideology, again, was going to wreak more violence than good. And then he looks at the nationalists, who, yes, like they defended the church, at least on paper, but he saw deep down that Franco did not really care much about Jesus and the church in its true sense. I mean, he reduced the church to a mere element of national identity, because Spain is a Catholic country, then yes, we have to uphold the church, but not what it actually teaches and not Jesus himself. So he really felt that he was kind of creating an idol out of the church. And ultimately, like this Spanish identity was becoming an idol. He divinized Spanish identity in a way that was completely excessive. So at the end of the day, he said, no, like as much as there might be bits of good in each of these options, none of them are true. I can't get behind any of these. And he wanted something more. Like he wanted something that really resonated with what he believed to be true and good for society. And he didn't want to settle. So thankfully at his seminary, he was exposed to a lot of the church's social teachings, so the social encyclicals, starting with Rerum Novarum. But also he read Pope Pius XI's follow-up to Rerum Novarum 40 years later, Quadragesimo Anno, which kind of developed a lot of Leo's ideas. But it was through studying these encyclicals that he realized, I don't have to settle. I don't have to just pick one of these horrible sides. I can put forward the judgment, a position that is distinct, that I believe is more, that has more integrity. So with this formation, with this kind of new vision of what was going on, or this new judgment of what was going on in Spain, he brought this with him when he was sent on his first mission in 1941 to the area in Basque country known as Mondragon. So he started just by getting to know the people in the area, paying a special attention to the workers there. And he saw that there was a union for the locksmiths, people who made locks in Mondragon. So he was like, okay, how can I build up these workers? How can I really help them to have more agency and to be able to defend their dignity? So he first of all started a school of apprentices so that younger locksmiths could be formed, gave them opportunity for training classes, but he also established a housing complex for them to live in so that they could have affordable housing. And the reason why he took such an interest in helping out the workers was ultimately it was twofold. On one hand, there was a religious dimension to what he was doing. Like he wanted to revitalize the faith of the community, but he also wanted to reform the social order. He wanted to really help them make certain necessary social changes. And for him, this twofold mission, I mean, these weren't two separate missions. The one went hand in hand with the other, because he understood that the people could only understand the faith, they could only really see the value of the faith by practicing true solidarity, by looking at how it pertained to their social circumstances. Otherwise, the faith just becomes about moralism, about following the rules. It becomes empty rituals or just sentimentality. But by showing the faith's relevance to their circumstances as workers, he could spread the gospel. He could live out his mission. So he started up several other initiatives around the union, trying to build up, again, new opportunities for the workers. And eventually, he establishes a cooperative bank for the workers in 1959 that provided financial and managerial banking for all the new firms, for all these different businesses. And on top of that, he establishes cooperatives, not just for finances, but for construction, for housing, for healthcare. And then, okay. So so this is from the Mondragon website. I want to give you all the data now, just so you can follow all the details of what actually was established and where it is today. Okay. So going from 1959, the early days of Mondragon, so there were initially only 5 people working within the first cooperative. Eventually that expands to becoming 92 different cooperatives, employing 70,500 people today. So from 59 with 5 workers in 1 cooperative, today it's 92 cooperatives, 70,500 people. And it actually is now the biggest employer in the Basque region in Spain and one of the largest companies in Spain. So all members of the Mondragon cooperatives are worker owners. It's a very important term. The worker owners participate in a democratic system via a one person, one vote system. So that means they elect representatives that participate in higher levels of leadership within the Mondragon cooperative system. That means if I'm a worker within one of these many cooperatives, I vote for who my boss is. Each worker has one vote. So this is, again, going back to Rerum Novarum. How do we give the workers agency? How do we give them opportunities to have real say over what goes on in the company that they're working for? Mondragon implements this system so that if you have a boss who doesn't respect you, that you vote them out. It's easy enough. And then rather than kind of what we see a lot of corporate conglomerates doing today, kind of absorbing other companies, when a particular firm within Mondragon grows, they encourage them to split off to create new co-ops to address particular problems or to create new products. And again, I have this understanding that when an entity gets too big, when a corporation gets too big, it is prone to more corruption. It's prone to focusing more on maximizing profits, on making money versus serving the common good, making good products. That's why they say when a particular company gets too big, better to break off, make a new one, so they can focus on whatever particular product they're making. And then, again, the point of this is to create a system that they say is decentralized and anti-fragile. It's less prone to corruption. Okay, so continuing, the commitment and duty of members of a society in the common good to mutual support and fraternity. So each firm's workers set a maximum ratio between the amounts of the highest paid workers and the lowest paid workers. So again, the workers vote for their salaries and they vote for everybody's salaries, basically. So in most of the firms within Mondragon, the threshold is around a 6-to-1 ratio. So that means if the boss, the CEO, is making $600,000 a year, the lowest paid is making $100,000, which is obviously not realistic. The lowest paid worker is not making $100,000, but you get the ratio. Okay. The reason why the gap is not too big is because the workers have a say over that. They make sure that the boss is not making way more than the rest of them. And the highest cap that they've ever reached is a 9-to-1 ratio, compared to the first Mondragon Club, which was a 3-to-1. But still, they tried to keep it within reasonable boundaries. I want to compare that 9-to-1 ratio to what most American corporations' days look like. It's going to scare you. Watch out. So McDonald's, let's guess. So if Mondragon is 9-to-1, what do you think McDonald's ratio is? And I want to take a guess.
13.
No, way more than that.
How about 99?
No, go way, way, way higher.
No, 1,000.
About just under 50.
1,200 to 1. So that means if the CEO of McDonald's is making $1,200,000, what is the lowest paid worker? It's 1,000. 1,000? I can't do math. It's not good. That's this one. They're not making one. But it gets worse. It gets worse. Coca-Cola is more than McDonald's. Now 1,200, but
15.
1,800. You're not going to guess what the worst company in the U.S. is.
Yes.
It's not Amazon, okay? No.
Full upbringing.
They make clothing.
No.
And I don't think they have them in, like, Northeast New York area.
Listen.
Ross.
Oh.
Do they have Rosses in New York? They do? I've never seen one. So guess what Ross is? If McDonald's was 1,200 to 1, Coke was 1,800, Ross is
2,400.
2,100. That's a lot. It's really bad. Compared to Mondragon, 9-to-1. Why is that? Why is it that the workers at Ross, the CEO is making 2,100 more money than the lowest paid worker? Because the workers at Ross have no power. They have no way to defend themselves, and federal government doesn't enact restrictions on how much they're making. So how do they have any power? This is what Father Arismendi was trying to do. He wants to ensure that the workers have a say. If this is unjust, they should be able to say something about it. If the boss is being unfair, he should be able to vote them out. So he's, yes, yeah.
These workers that are divided, are they in America or are they
Probably not. They're probably in countries where there's like no regulation at all. So yeah, and that's the other thing.
So it's
They're like the labor laws here are pretty lax, but when you look overseas, it's worse, and that's why we outsource so much. And again, this is why Mondragon, they don't do that because the workers vote not to do that. They vote not to outsource the production of certain products. So again, the whole point comes back to this, empowering the workers so that they can create a more human corporation. So here's another interesting thing. So rather than laying off workers, if a firm needs to downsize because they happen not to be doing very well, they attempt to place workers in a different co-op within the Mondragon family. So remember, they're all different companies. They're producing all different products, all different services within this one co-op family. If let's say this business, which is making water bottles, is going under, rather than lay off the workers, and again, keep in mind, like, there's a real communal sense. Like, you know the guy or the girl who's going to lose their job, they're not going to be able to feed their family, you're going to be really upset for them. So rather than ruin their life, you send them to the company that's making chairs. And maybe they don't want to do that. Maybe they don't know how. They'll learn, and then they'll make money. They'll be fine. So again, it's this kind of this solidarity. Like, I'm responsible for my neighbor, but if I don't see the person next to me, again, this is the problem with outsourcing. Then why do I care if they can't feed their families? So it's like they try to create a corporate culture where you feel responsible for your neighbor. If you ruin their life, you feel bad about it because you know them. Anyway, so and it's only the worker owners and not the investors. This is important. The worker owners and not the investors have the right to vote on decisions made by co-ops in the Mondragon ecosystem. So that means investors don't really have any say over major decisions made, which is obviously very different from most American corporations. It's the workers who get to decide. And then lastly, in Mondragon, the labor hires capital. The workers hire their bosses rather than the capital hiring the labor. So again, not overthrowing the system, but reversing it, we can say. Obviously, this is an inversion of the standard model where everything is subservient to capital. The bosses call all the shots. So again, I kind of want to bring this full circle and see how Pope Leo XIII, looking at the turmoil in his times, looking at what the gospel really has to say to us, and not wanting to compromise it, not wanting to water it down. Father Arismendi takes these insights and applies them to his circumstances, creates a system that's much more just and much more human, because he didn't want to compromise. He didn't want to settle. He wanted something more human, and ultimately something more beautiful than what he saw going on out there. And just to wrap things up before we open this up to questions, to discussion, I want to hear everyone's comments as well. These are some of the essential things that I learned by digging deeper into Rerum Novarum and into the Mondragon story. So first off, again, this need to start from a kind of original position rather than taking one of the mainstream ones out there and sprinkling certain Christian values on top. But not only that, but also to establish initiatives that actually respond directly to people's needs, looking for avenues to engage in direct action rather than just engaging in symbolic politicking, posting an infographic or something like that. When you look at Father Arismendi, he's less interested in, again, signaling his values, but he's how can I respond directly to the needs of my people? I'm sent on mission to this neighborhood, Mondragon. What are the people's needs? What can I actually do to make their lives better? Not how can I take a stand, and not that there's anything wrong with it, but again, if we don't look at the person and their concrete needs, we are missing something. It's a very important piece of the puzzle. And I think we see it here today, at the worker. We see that Dorothy also, on top of being inspired by Rerum Novarum, had this dissatisfaction with just taking one of the mainstream options and trying to just swallow it and deal. She wanted something, she wanted the full package. She wanted something that was truly living out the gospel, and that's how we ended up here today, because she didn't want to settle. And she wanted to directly respond to the people in front of her. I mean, the first Catholic worker house started not because she invented an idea, it's because there were people outside saying they wanted food. So like, okay, well, let's respond to their needs. So I think this is something we have to learn from. In the midst of very confusing times, very disturbing times, how am I being asked to respond directly to the needs God is placing in front of me? We need to keep our eyes open, the same way Father Artismendi did. But also, the other thing I think we have to look at is more like, when I think about what we're doing here tonight, like there's a reason why Peter started the meetings for clarification of thought. Like, because our times are so confusing, we need to stop and look at, again, like what's actually happening right now, rather than jumping on one side or the other and going to shout the other side down. Like, what is really going on? And I think if we look at what's going on today, it's like we're in a very paradoxical situation, because on one hand, we're told that we're in extremely polarized times. Like one side hates the other. If I find out you voted for that person, you're evil, I hate you. But ironically, we see that both sides, as we frame it, are very much driven by similar interests. And this is meant to trivialize a lot of the evils that we see going on out there. But I do think we have to recognize there is a lot of corporate interest. There's a lot of elite interest driving the mainstream sides that are out there. And we do need to be critical of this. We do need to acknowledge this. And I fear that the more we play into this simplistic narrative that we're fed on the media, I mean, I worry that, first of all, like, it turns us against our own neighbor. Not to say that every view that they espouse is justified, I'm saying that. But like, the reality is I have more in common with this person next to me who may have voted in a way that scandalizes me than the elites who are driving things behind the scenes. And it's in their interest that I turn against my neighbor, because if I think they're my enemy, I refuse to collaborate with them. I refuse to find any point of commonality. Then nothing's going to get accomplished, and their power kind of stays in place. Nothing touches it. So I think, again, like on both the concrete level of engaging in direct action, responding to people's needs in concrete ways, there's also this kind of theoretical work that we have to do in critiquing the narratives that are handed to us. It's not as simple as they make it out to be. And again, like if we turn against our own neighbor, like if we're not looking to collaborate with the person next to us, even with certain disagreements, we're kind of entrenching the status quo as it is. This is my fear. And this is why I think Dorothy was open to working with all kinds of people. This is why I've met all kinds of people when I come here. It's not about proving I'm on the right side. It's about doing what I can to serve the common good. What else was I gonna say? And then again, just like continuing for one more second on this theme of like how a lot of corporate elite interest drives a lot of what we see happening on both sides of the divide. I think we have to look at the fact that like Pope Francis uses this word in Laudato Si a lot. He talks about this technocratic paradigm that we're living in. And I mean, ultimately what he was getting at is that like decisions are primarily being made by so-called experts who claim to know more than the average person in all kinds of situations. And these are not people who are elected by certain constituents. Like they rise to power because of certain, again, expertise that they claim to have, which ends up taking away agency from the everyday people, which is the issue that Pope Leo was very worried about. And what ends up happening is the more power gets centralized into the hands of so-called experts, the harder it is to address corruption of power, because it's hard to even see where the power is operating from. And because it's so big, it's so hard to navigate now. This is something that Martha, Dorothy's granddaughter, said when she visited, where I teach at Seton Hall in Jersey, and she came to speak to the students, and she was saying, one of the things that's so difficult now, compared to when Dorothy started the worker, is that again, power is so centralized. It's operating on such a huge scale that it's hard to do anything about it. This is why we have to, again, kind of unplug from the standard narrative and ask, like, what's really going on here? What can I actually do, rather than just getting caught up in the zeitgeist? Because then all we do, like, we become more and more powerless. We lose our agency. And then, what else was I gonna say? Okay, so, blah, 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 blah. I wanted to talk. Okay, so I wanted to skip to Pope Leo the 14th now. So obviously, the fact that the new pope chose the name Leo in honor of Leo the 13th, this is another sign that it's an important moment to revisit Rerum Novarum. And I do want to read from Pope Leo the 14th himself. So he was asked, I think like a week after he was elected, why did he choose the name Leo? And this is what he said. Sensing myself called to continue in this same path, I chose to take the name Leo, mainly because Leo the 13th, in his historic encyclical Rerum Novarum, addressed the social question in the context of the first great industrial revolution. And then he goes on to insist that we're in the midst of a paradigm shift that is similar and perhaps more drastic to the one Leo the 13th faced. So yeah, I think the fact that Leo is calling our attention to Rerum Novarum is a reason that we need to pay close attention. And just to kind of close things up, I want to talk about how I've seen Rerum Novarum help me in very practical ways, in particular in my work within education. So I'm thinking of, so I spent 8 years teaching at a high school in Newark. So one of my students is here from the early days there. And there was a certain point, I remember I think it was 2020, it was during COVID, where I saw, I knew a lot of my students were very concerned about certain political issues. They were worried about a lot of social injustices. My concern was, again, like they're getting very caught up in, again, like the internet zeitgeist, following these very simplistic narratives rather than looking at, okay, like what's actually happening and what can I actually do to make a difference? This impulse to signal my values, to show I'm on the right side, rather than actually giving something. And again, this very infantile fixation with I want to cancel you because you used the wrong word. I want to get in trouble because you said this. Once again, it's like, what are you accomplishing? How are you furthering the common good? You're just entrenching the status quo further. So I decided that I wanted to read Rerum Novarum with my students to see how that might open up our conversation about social injustices in politics. And some of the interesting things that I saw from reading it is that they have a curiosity to learn more about their local history. So Newark, New Jersey has a very particular history, which if you're not familiar with it, I think you should try to learn a little bit more about it because it's emblematic of a lot of things that have happened in this country. But what's interesting is that in Newark, before the 1980s, there were numerous avenues for direct action, ranging from grassroots organizations, labor unions, community development corporations, churches, block associations. So the average everyday citizen could have a direct impact on the life of the city. Like there was a way to get their hands dirty and change real problems. But we start to see due to certain changes on the federal level, certain economic changes, these avenues for direct action start to wither away. It becomes more and more difficult for the everyday person to make a difference. Why? Because everything's becoming centralized. We're entering further and further within this technocratic paradigm that robs the agency of the everyday person. And this is why eventually I saw with my students, like, we're forced we were resolved to virtue signal, to post stuff on Instagram rather than do something that's actually going to change what's going on the ground, because there are so few avenues to do it. Where do we even start? But we said, okay, well, we want to do that. Like, we want to engage in direct action rather than just doing stuff on a symbolic level. So some ideas they came up with. First, they started with wanting to get to know their neighbors. Most of them admitted they had no idea who their next door neighbor was. They didn't know their life stories. They didn't know what issues they were dealing with. So we started saying, well, let's go meet our neighbors and share what we learned from them. Let's see if that may open up our conversations about what's going on in our society. There was one girl in particular that really impressed me because, she was very gung-ho about a lot of social issues, but she came to me and said, when Pope Leo says that, like, the family, the home is the building block of society, she's like, I really want to change society, but my family life is really tough. And I want to start looking at that too. Like, I just feel like it's going to be hard for me to make a change in society if, like, I have such a hard time talking to my parents. And, like, I kept in touch with her over the years, but, like, and I saw that things did start to improve. But it was very impressive to me that this girl was like, I want to start at my home and see how that's going to help me change society to make it better. starting on that basic level. Another thing that they decided to do is to write letters to local politicians. So we ended up making kind of like a map of all the representatives, the council people, the senators, etc. And they wrote letters about issues impacting their own neighborhoods to these local politicians. And then the larger fruit of this, of reading Rerum Novarum, is like, in addition to becoming more focused on avenues for local direct action, it made them more interested to look for ways that we can collaborate with other people rather than to like point out these small disagreements and cancel them for it. It made them more interested in accomplishing something with others, even if, yes, they have real disagreements, rather than just like staying stuck in their silo and saying, I'm right, you're wrong. So, no, this is why I emphasize so much the value of returning to Rerum Novarum, but also to Mondragon, because I see like in times like these, it has the potential to produce a lot of fruit and to really offer us some clarity in very confusing and very troubling times. So that's my bit. I want to hear comments, I want to hear questions, thoughts. Nate's gonna start us off. So Nate's, thank you. Okay. So this is one of my first students that I ever had, like, how many, 10 years ago, 11 years ago? Something like that. Okay, talk loud, because you're not.
Yeah, so I'm already out.
Do you want to? Yeah, sure, thank you.
Okay, so for me, I'm only writing this down just as an opportunity to share the way that I've articulated my thoughts on our current cultural status, right? Status quo. So just a little backdrop. Out of '09, I've been discussing this a lot because of certain people in my life that have gone down the spiritual path where, it's alternative old world spiritualisms, where, if you read historical pieces, you can see like where it's coming from, even like stuff like basic with zodiac, constellations, all those different things, right? Those things are historically substantiated, but it, in a way, became too radical for that person, right? And then, so this made me think about, how do we evolve into these different ideations as a culture and as people, right? So I'll start off like the idea is the zeitgeist, right? That's the cycle that we're all in. And going back to what he said with the deification of Spanish culture, right? Idolatry. So I'll break it down like how I have it written in my notes. So how do we evaluate our identity, right? That's the biggest thing. So Western culture in its current iteration is predicated on identity politics. At what point do we disengage from political ideation to avoid egoism and deifying political leaders, right? So to that extent, it's how much does me being represented matter to the point where I am deifying myself, right? So, which is an interesting point because that's where, poverty of spirit comes into play. And that is, there's a lot of different proliferations of poverty of spirit that can be discussed, right? But I think that's one thing that's not really discussed. Like, it's important, right, to have representation because we live in a democratic republic, right? Like, we want to be able to hear our voices and to see ourselves. But I think there's also an extent, right? And I'm not defining it. I don't know what it is, but something that I've been thinking about. And then from there, what I want to break it down by is, and this is all, like, I want to hear your response at the end, right? And just how you articulate it. So historically, politics is substantiated by the amalgamation of executive, judicial, and religious zeal, right? So going back thousands of years ago, you have the Holy Roman Emperor, you have Egyptian god kings, right? And then to contextualize that for us today, what I would say is that that's how we get movements like MAGA, right? Like, we're going to go back to this religious level, purity, whatever it was. And going back to Egypt, right? That's how you go from having the gods like Ra and whoever. So now you have Atun Ra, Amun Ra, which are reiterations of former things, right? And they're like, oh, well, now we're going to take this version of this and say that we identify with this, right? And so now we have the power and we can do these things because we're right, because we're allegedly in line with something, but it's actually something different, right? And then that ultimately results in a Protestant proliferation because this is a Protestant country, right? And part of that, I would say, is the U.S. in particular seems to be following a 100-year cycle, right? So in the 1800s, the early 1800s, right, you see the War of 1812, the Spanish War, right, the Alamo, all those other things. We had a lot of problems, like if you read the Federalist Papers back then, we had a lot of problems with our monetary value, right? We didn't really have an identity, right? We had reached our zenith, right, with fighting for independence. And now it's like, how do we identify ourselves, right? And that premise is what the cycle is, right? So there's a lot of economic turmoil and political dissidence out of 1800s, right? Then, we have the civil rights movement. That's our point, right? That's how we identify ourselves. And then after that, we come into industrialization, right? And then after industrialization, where everything is gaudy, you have all these huge mansions and everything built. Now we come to another point, early 1900s, where the U.S. is falling apart again, right? So we have famines, right? You have the Dust Bowls in the Midwest. You have the Great Depression. You have all these things, right? Then there's another turning point, right? We use World War II to revive our economy, which is why we didn't actually get involved that much in World War I, but we did in World War II, right? And then obviously I don't want to give a whole history lesson, but then now, right? At the end of the 1900s, you see that we come into another industrial boom, right? 80s, 70s, 60s, the 90s, right? America was at its peak culturally, politically, economically, right? We had a lot of great things. And in the early 2000s, you saw some of this trickle over. But then again, as it happened with the turn of the century, we had the '08 crisis, right? Where stocks were being shorted or loans were being shorted and all that other stuff, right? And so it's long-winded, but it's all different things that it's part of the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah. It's the one.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, but it's just like this.
It's the you're kind of.
Wait. I'm gonna close it out. I'm gonna close it out in a way that makes sense, right? So I would say that part of where we are right now, so right, because we are in a Protestant country, right? To a majority effect.
No.
That's the saddest thing I have ever heard in my life.
But no, I'm just.
Oh, this shit.
But let me clarify, right? So I'm saying this from the perspective of the right wing, right, where MAGA and everything is based on we're going to make America great again, go back to these Protestant ideals, right? So it goes back to that post-industrial thing where we're trying to, reinvigorate with certain ideals, right? And so now what I think that we're seeing in the current political state, right, is you're seeing a lot of these ideals from people like Poe, Dostoevsky, or if you've read like The Stranger, right, where you have these concepts of perversity of ideation, right, where a lot of people are going against certain things because they don't want to be a part of what the other thing was. And if you've read like The Stranger, for example, the main character, he's ostracized because of his nonconformity and because people don't understand him, right? So with all that, so then I would say, right, my point with all of that is like, obviously, like when it comes to politics, right, you want to, as a Christian, you want to follow who you believe will help, care, who best aligns with your spiritual beliefs, right? So, and with this current zeitgeist, right, how do you, and I'm sorry if certain things weren't aligned in total, right? This is just quick writing notes while he's talking. So obviously I'm trying to polish my ideas here, but for him to talk about.
Okay, can I see what the mean.
Yeah, so like, how do you, with what we're discussing, how do you address all of that?
Get in the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay, what?
Sorry.
No, but what's standing out from what you're saying is, and also because I know what you're talking about, because you've shared, I know where this is coming from, and I think there's this thick identity issue is really important here, because like the zeitgeist, what I sometimes call the hysteria cycle. I mean, there are a lot of things driving it, and I think a lot of it has to do with, again, corporate interests. Like, why is it that the media perpetuates certain simplistic narratives? Because it sells, and it kind of dumbs us out, ultimately. But why do we buy into it? This is where the identity thing comes in. And what you're saying about poverty of spirit, that like, I don't think we're formed to really look at ourselves anymore and to understand who we are. The things that used to make up the substance of a person's identity, and belonging to a family, belonging to a particular culture, a particular locale with its own local culture, like belong to a faith community. Like these things are eroding. Like we, to quote Simone Weil, like we are rootless. When you don't have roots, when you don't have the real stuff that makes for a solid identity, that makes you confident and sure of what you believe and what you stand for, it's easy to get swept up in this zeitgeist. It's easy to cling on to all kinds of ideologies, and as you're saying, like to create these idols, which is, I mean, I think you're right to say a lot of, to a certain extent, a lot of political stuff today is driven by the reemergence of certain old pagan idols. But it's, again, like just as in the old pagan times as today, like when you don't have a clear understanding of who you are, what your roots are, it's easy to just follow anything, follow any ideology. Especially if you're someone who's vulnerable, like if you're someone who's gone through trauma, if you're someone who struggles mentally, it's even easier to get swept up in these things. So when you talk about poverty of spirit, like it makes me think of, again, Dorothy, because it's like for her to serve the poor, it's not just about like having a sensitivity, having a sympathy for the poverty, it's also an internal disposition of your soul. Like it's an awareness of who you are as someone who's poor. And again, like even if you are economically stable, financially stable, spiritually you're poor because you can't sustain yourself. You didn't even create yourself. So I think what you're saying, Nate, is like this struggle to embrace our own spiritual poverty, to even look at ourselves in the mirror, makes it very easy to get caught up in the zeitgeist, to create these idols, chase after them. And this is, again, like, this is why the real revolution, like as to use Dorothy's words, like it begins with the revolution of the heart. Like if there isn't this internal revolution where I discover who I am as a person made in God's image, it's really hard to make a difference in the society around me. And I can't experience that revolution of the heart if nobody loves me, like if I don't have a community where I'm loved. This is why we have places like this. This is why we have these communities, not just like partially so we can respond to social issues, but also because if we are not loved, like we're gonna go crazy. We'll never be happy. So, yeah, and I think that this identity and poverty is to your point.
Yeah, I was just trying to make it more tangible.
No, and again, because I know what you're talking about, like, it's a very real thing. And I have more of a reason to pay attention, not just to the economically poor around us, to look at people who are lost, like family members, friends who are lost because they don't feel loved. Like, even if you completely disagree with the ideologies they cling on to, it's not an excuse to not love them. More of a reason to, because otherwise they're really going to lose it. So yeah, and it's a very important question. So that's fine.
Yeah, I was two questions. One, what do you know about the culture, the geography, the history of the vast country that makes it a place where this movement could thrive? And the second one, what is important for us to know about the cooperative movement in this people?
Yeah, I'm happy you asked that. Forgot to talk about that part because.
Can you repeat the question?
So you're asking, what was it in particular about the culture, the region of the Basque Country that made it more disposed to starting a co-op like Mondragon, and how is that compared to the U.S., how is that different, and what does the co-op movement look like here today? So no, I think in Basque Country, so first of all, like there is a lot of agrarian work, there's a lot of farming going on, and you kind of need to learn how to cooperate in order to pull that job off. But I also do think just on a pure cultural level, there was a real spirit of solidarity. Like I remember reading the biography, he said that Father Arismendi remembered his dad on his way home from work would stop at the bar to just make conversation with the neighbors, just to talk informally, because there's this sense that you should spend time with your neighbor, you should get to know them. So I think, again, like culturally, and also like in terms of the labor, like they were more disposed to being attentive to the other and working with them. And there's a piece in the New Yorker that they recently did on Mondragon, and the author asks one of the representatives in Spain, like, why is it that the co-op movement has not really taken off in the U.S.? Which is not to say there aren't co-ops, like there are some, but not in the way it has in Spain and some parts of Europe. And the guy said kind of jokingly, well, Americans don't really know how to cooperate, so it's kind of makes it harder for them to start co-ops. And I do think it says something about, yeah, like this is a country founded on individualism, on lifting yourself up by the bootstraps. And then on the economic level, like, yeah, it's the self-interested individual who looks out for themselves, and maybe if they're nice, they throw money at the poor. But yeah, it's harder. I think it's harder here. But again, there are co-ops. I haven't done a lot of research, but I can tell you, so like when we first presented this research that we did, there was an interview that one of our friends who organized this that he did with the woman who was doing a lot of research on co-ops, which I can maybe share. But they exist. It's just not as much as in, say, bread and rest of the world. Daniela, and then we'll go there with that. Gila. Oh, that.
My question is around, I brought this up before in other places, but really bridging the gap is something I'm curious to hear from people in this room and your thoughts, Steve.
Yeah.
When we are confronted with the zeitgeist and being pulled into these ideologies that either resonate with us deeply because of our own personal traumas or our own belief systems or our own sufferings, like I find it within myself very hard not to hate my neighbor who feels so opposed to my own opinions. So I'd love to hear, but also like that doesn't feel like love, and it actually encloses us. And to your point, I see how it really keeps us stuck and without movement. So I'm curious from people here or your thoughts on what has helped others be able to embrace someone or someone's ideology or their human person when it's so hard for you to confront your differences.
Ideologies.
By that quick, that's a great question. I sometimes think of like, this is more from the Eastern Orthodox tradition of like theosis, like our ultimate aim is to become like little Christs. And although people might pick their political beliefs, I think one reason I've heard that people's political beliefs become so ossified with their identity is that they don't really have a sense of identity as sons and daughters of God. And I think it's kind of, my kind of take is we need to kind of like reignite like a mystical appreciation for our tradition to recover that identity, because otherwise the more political ideas or any other kind of perhaps idolatrous identity will probably crystallize. But I think, yeah, recovering our sense of being children of God and like keeping that in mind even when we assume.
Yeah, I would like to address the point you made because it's something that I think about very, very often. And I think it goes back to something that Stephen mentioned and that is also mentioned in Pope Leo's encyclica, actually, that if you think about it, deep down, all sides are striving for the common good. Whatever good that they think it is, but all sides have a core set of values, which are values that makes us humans, that differ for each of us in what exactly they mean, but they are quite common. And there have been studies made on this. Actually, there is a very good book by sociologist Jonathan Haynes, actually on moral judgment. Like all sides have, I think it was like 4 or 5 core set of beliefs. For instance, how we think about, and I wrote them down here, how we think about harm and care, right? How we think about fairness, how we think about loyalty. All sides value those things. Yes, how we exactly value those changes, but at the core, that's what makes us humans, right? And what has really helped me was, or is also to think that, okay, we are all striving for the common good. I think we're all coming from the same set of beliefs. Then how do we find a common ground, or how do we try to understand each other without antagonizing each other? For me, yes, believing that you, deep down, I think you are coming from a good place, whatever good it is for you. But if I'm going to bring some change, then maybe the best way is not to antagonize, but to see you in your humanity, and to try to understand what values matter to you, and try to work on that. So yeah, I don't know, maybe I might be too optimistic on human nature, but I think we are, deep down, we are all striving for good, when whatever good means for us. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question that was inspired by the comment, Americans don't know how to cooperate. I hope the question is still relevant to the way the conversation has turned. My question is, what do you make of the phenomenon, which I personally think is a toxic, corrosive phenomenon, of, in America, wealth and population and opportunities being concentrated in cities at the expense of these wonderful small towns that we used to see idealized in Frank Capra movies, but are now empty of opportunity, and where people feel quite justifiably left out of the American conversation.
Good. Chappy, you asked of that. Yeah, I want to respond to that one, and then maybe I'll circle. I hate saying circle back. I hate HR speaks. Come back to Niela's question. No, I'm really happy you asked about like the geographical divides. This is another thing that I hate about the zeitgeist. That question is like a really big thing with huge ramifications that we don't talk about because it's not a sexy topic. We rather talk about. Anyway, it's important, and we need to talk about it more. So like I go on anti-suburbs tirades a lot. If you know me, then you know that I do this. Yes, I mean I think I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but suburbs have a lot to do with it. But in terms of your question of like concentration of wealth in cities versus smaller towns or especially rural areas, and this is again like another Dorothy Day insight that there is supposed to be a symbiotic relationship between the country and the city. That you can't just have everything concentrated in the city and then the farm, the rural areas, deteriorate. Like there needs to be this mutual support because then if everyone's flocking to the cities, then like it's not, you will have concentration of wealth, then you'll have extreme poverty, which becomes completely unsustainable. But also, like, I don't know, like, there's something about, I don't know, like, this, as much as there's something kind of, like, idealistic about the back to the land movement, like, there is a need to have a relationship with the land, which you can't really have here. Like, people do need to be farming, and that comes back to, again, like, this kind of expansion of corporate power where, like, you have Monsanto who's calling all the shots with food production in Europe, whereas this local farmers, like, they have no agency now. Why? Because everything's centralized, and no one wants to talk about this because it's not part of the zeitgeist. So anyway, I think there needs to be a lot more attention paid to the relationship between the different about urban design. Yeah, there's a lot to be said there. So, but it's something we should all be thinking more about. But then I think like let's wrap up with Daniela's question of the different responses that you guys flared. So I want to like I always kind of like harp on this that we need to be talking to people who disagree with us more rather than like hiding in our cozy silos. And I want to acknowledge like it's easy for me to harp on this because I have less skin in the game because okay, like I don't come from economic precarity. People are less likely to profile me. It is easier. That doesn't mean I'm wrong though. I mean, I still have a point when I say we should be aiming, at least aspiring to talk to people who disagree with us. And I think like some tools that are helpful, I think what you're saying, Colin, is important because like when someone says something that really enrages me, do I pray for them? Like, do I pray, first of all, to like see the image of God in this horrible person, but also, like, if you truly believe that their beliefs are heinous, like, are you gonna pray for their conversion as well as for yours? Because you're not perfect either. So yeah, like on that spiritual level, but then more practically speaking, like if someone is straight up wrong, like no, you should not endorse or applaud their false ideology. But if you just shout them down and say like you're evil, you're on the wrong side, like, you know it's not going to work because that's just not how people function. I think it's really important to learn more about, first of all, to learn more about what's going on in the first place, because most of us just again like we see the sound bites, we see the infographics, and then we think, no, there's a lot more happening on the ground. But also, like, do I understand where certain ideologies come from? So, like what Nate was saying about certain, like, old school pagan ideologies reemerging. Like, do I understand what's behind that? The positive things that have motivated it, even if it's still an evil ideology, like the good intention that got twisted somewhere along the way. Do I even understand my own my own beliefs? Like, do I know where my beliefs came from and what some of the weaknesses of my position are? It's really hard to have a conversation with someone if I don't fully understand what they're trying to say or where they're coming from. And that's why, like, personally, like, I try to read what people who I disagree with. I try to understand, like, so where are they coming from? And I do talk to people, like if I'm talking to someone who has a very extreme position, like, yeah, why? Like, break this down for me. And I'll tell you why I think you're wrong, but I still want to understand what you're saying. The other thing is, like, discerning the time and place to have these debates. Like, some settings are not really fit. They're not really conducive to, like, really getting into the weeds of our disagreements. Sometimes you just need to make small talk and ask them, like, how is their family doing? Like, again, coming back to Colin's point, to like establishing this human dimension. Is your no? I'm not even here from.
Huh?
What's your
No, I
name?
was just complimenting myself that you referenced mine.
But your name's Colin, right?
Correct.
Okay, I thought I was wrong for that. I remember you, Colin. Yeah.
Good to see you.
No, so again, like, there's a time to debate the super MAGA person or the whoever, SJW, whatever, but like, there's also time to like, how you been? Like, what's going on? You're still a person. And then the last thing I'll say, so like some of us are part of a community within the Catholic Church, which it's interesting because in this community there are people with various political points of view. And we have one friend who's not in New York, but who, yeah, I mean, when it comes down to like pretty far left in her own way, like she has her own brand of leftism. But like, yeah, like gets super enraged whenever she meets someone, especially in our community, who's MAGA, who voted right. And she reached a point where she's like, I'm tired of being enraged. And I still believe everything I believe, and I think they're dead wrong. But they're part of this community with me. Like, they're my brother and sister in Christ. What am I gonna do with them? And this friend happened to work at a school where a lot of undocumented people their children were going to school. And she was like, I really am pissed off that my friend voted for someone we may blame all this crazy stuff, but what if I took a risk and asked them to help me prepare care packages for the families because they're in a really crappy situation? She was shocked at this risk that she took worked. That like these people who she's tempted to hate, like helped her to serve these families. She still disagrees with them and she tells them, she doesn't gloss over it. But she accomplished something very concrete with these people, which, I mean, that's not nothing. And it's much more than yelling at someone saying you're wrong and I hate you. So are we looking for opportunities, even with the people we really disagree with, to do something for the common good? The opportunities are there. You have to pay attention, though. Another question up here, and then we'll go to Jane. Yes.
I just wanted to underline your exact.
Wait, which the mic is?
Then. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ann. I'm 68 years old. I'm not young. And you're absolutely right. It's divide and conquer. We learned this in the unions. The nurses hate the doctors hate the pediatricians, the pediatricians hate the anesthesiologists, the anesthesiologist PT hates OT hates recreation. And you have to be careful anytime anyone's teaching hate, because we have to come together. We have to find common ground. That's true. Just as a point of order, the way I learned it was that Congress shall make no law establishing the freedom of religion. And the first time I heard it, it was America is a Christian country, which was offensive to me at the time. But now we're even narrowing it down a little bit more. And I suppose that's true if you want to say that every president from the beginning was Protestant, except for President Kennedy, who was killed. Every president who survived was Protestant. The people who came across from England on the Mayflower were witch-burning Protestants. We know where we come from. But the fact is, Congress shall make no law discerning the freedom of religion. And that's something I want to try to hold to. The thing is, if I were in my church and I was preaching, I would be preaching on the Good Samaritan. And I would preach on the Good Samaritan every Sunday. Wasn't it that they were supposed to be mortal enemies, and that he took the wounded man and put him to the hotel and paid for his welfare? Yeah, that's my question. Isn't it the story of the Good Samaritan?
Yeah. You could read that. But let's go to Dan. I left it all.
Did you answer that question?
I can answer everything all together.
Do we know that because please repeat that version? I would just want to add about
Is it Anche? You make sure just
that.
yeah. Yeah.
Wait, I can check it because
You have to put close.
Like that. Now I'm just saying two things. I think it's what the whole part of this is sitting in the house of the co-founder of the Catholic Worker, Dorothy Day, who never liked to consider herself the founder and always deferred to the founder, Peter Morn. Was he mentioned tonight at all? And I didn't hear it. I'm sorry. And I wanted to just say, he was one that believed truly in the idea that you go back to the land is going back to Christ, right? Now, I agree that many of us don't think that's possible very much anymore, although we do have a Catholic worker farm. And the only other thing I wanted to add to that is that in these discussions about what do I do with the people that are trying to really disagree with me or I don't have an agreement with, Dorothy always talked about seeking concordances. And that means, the thing like when you said about the small talk or asking, to her that was a grandiose moment where you could just show your humanity one for the other. And then you think of Peter Moore, and I think of this thing he said in one of his essays, which were a collection of essays that someone named, or named the collections of his writings, and they were considered simple. But one of them was that went on and said, to give and not to take. That is what makes, you gotta put up the language of it. To give and what not to take. That is what makes man human. To serve and not to rule. That is what makes man human. To help and not to crush. That is what makes man human.
There's something so beautiful in that concept to that. Yeah, it's just was beautiful. It's a beautiful meeting. I could go on so can send any. What can I say? You did a very good job. I mean, people did right? I'm right. I'm not going to say that.
Can I make a last comment real quick? Yeah, right here.
Is it on? Yeah. Okay, so just this point about divide and conquer. Yeah, I mean, I think we really have to look at how this is kind of the program. Like, it's within the interest of the status quo that you don't talk to your neighbor because it just keeps the status quo the way it is. But it's not just, I mean, it's part of it's hate, but part of it is also this kind of moral zeal that's very American. So I mean, we can debate whether America is a Christian country. I mean, most of the presidents are Masons, more so than Christian. It's another rabbit hole. But I think a lot of us are blinded by this very puritanical moral zeal to prove I'm on the right side, I'm saved and you're damned. I don't think it's, maybe some people hate the enemy, but most are very afraid to be deemed on the wrong side of history. I have to do to prove that I'm righteous and I'm not like the bad side. Therefore, I don't want to even associate with, those people because they're going to think I'm bad and I'm going to get the scarlet letter on me. But again, what gets you into heaven is not proving how righteous you are. That's the Pharisees. They were the wrong ones. It's the people who do the works of mercy, and that's what Jane was saying. So when I ask my enemy, hey, how have you been? How's the kids? So it's a work of mercy. Like, you're more righteous in Jesus' eyes and saying, I condemn those people on that side. Yeah, so something to think about. Who are you going to ask how they're doing, even if you hate them? And yeah, Peter and Warren, thank you, Jake. Like, again, I just want to reiterate, the whole reason we're doing this on a Friday night is Peter Warren, who founded this Catholic worker with Dorothy. That Dorothy, obviously, again, emphasized works of mercy. You have to do stuff for people, but if you don't take a moment to stop and ask, okay, what's going on in our society? What does Jesus say? What does the gospel say? What does the church say? If we don't take time to clarify, and again, this is what Pope Leo was doing, you have to clarify what's going on, what is our judgment, what is our position, then you're not going to be able to do anything because you don't have a clear view of what's going on. So, I mean, that's Peter, though. Like, that's all Peter. So we have snacks in the back. Some of our friends brought stuff tonight. If anyone's interested, it's like I have QR codes with like the full. We did like an exhibit with different panels and images. Like if you want to read the whole thing, we have these QR code cards. And then if you want a prayer card for Father Arismendi, he's venerable right now. So like he is in the process of being considered for canonization. So there is like an official prayer. If you want to take one of these cards, I'm going to leave them up here. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys.